I am Sarah, and I am 0.23 years old now. As I sit by my apartment window, looking at the city lights, flickering like distant stars, I can't help but think about the love story that began years ago in the quiet town of Willow Creek. It feels like a lifetime ago, yet in many ways, it still lives inside me, as vivid as the pages of my favorite book. Back in school, I was the kind of girl who lived in the pages of her books. Intelligent, ambitious, and carrying the weight of expectations on my slender shoulders. I found solace in the rustling pages of novels, in the quiet hum of the library, and in the steady rhythm of knowledge. My world revolved around exams, scholarships, and the silent dream of leaving town to chase something bigger. David was my opposite. He was an athlete, a leader on the soccer team, and a magnet for laughter and friendship. His presence in a room was like the sun breaking through the clouds, warm, bright, and impossible to ignore. He had an easygoing nature, an infectious smile, and a confidence that made the world feel like it could be conquered with a single goal on the field. At first, our worlds never touch. I admired David from a distance, but never imagined a boy like him would notice a girl like me. And yet, he did. It all began one fateful afternoon in the school library. It was raining outside, the droplets tapping gently against the window panes. I had my head buried in my notes, preparing for an important exam, when David walked in, searching for a quiet place to escape the noise of the world. He wasn't one for libraries, but something drew him in that day. When he spotted me sitting alone, he hesitated before taking the seat across from me. I glanced up, momentarily startled, but said nothing. For a while, we sat in silence. I was lost in my studies, and he was absent-mindedly flipping through a book. But then, curiosity took over. "What are you studying?" he asked, his voice breaking the stillness. I looked up, momentarily startled. "Physics," I replied simply. David chuckled. "Ah, my worst nightmare." A small smile tugged at the corner of my lips. It was the first time I had really looked at him, not as the popular athlete, but as someone real. Someone who, beneath his confidence, had his own struggles. From that day on, things began to change. David would find excuses to visit the library, pretending to study but mostly just looking for a chance to talk to me. And to my own surprise, I found myself enjoying his company. He made me laugh, something I hadn't done in a long time. He had this way of making everything seem lighter, as if the weight of the world wasn't so heavy after all. Slowly but surely, our friendship deepened. We walked together after school, talked about everything and nothing, and found comfort in each other's presence. David, who had always been surrounded by people, discovered that my quiet strength was more powerful than any cheer from the crowd. I, who had always believed that books held all the answers, realized that sometimes life's greatest lessons were learned outside the pages. But life has a way of testing love in ways no one expects. As graduation approached, the inevitable question loomed over us. What came next? I had been accepted into a prestigious university miles away, my dreams of becoming a scientist within reach. David had been offered a scholarship to play soccer at a different school, one that would take him in an opposite direction. The night before, our final day of school, we met under the old oak tree in the park, a place that had become ours over time. The air was thick with unspoken words, the weight of goodbye pressing down on us. "I wish we had more time," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. David reached for my hand, his grip firm yet gentle. "We had time," he said, "and it was real." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Will we still be us, even if we're far apart? David smiled, though there was a sadness in his eyes. "You'll always be my Sarah," he murmured, "and I'll always be your David." The next morning, we said our goodbyes, promising to keep in touch, to never forget. And though distance separated us, our love never faded. We wrote letters, sent messages, and held on to the hope that fate would bring us back together. Years passed. I became a scientist, my name appearing in journals and research papers. David became a professional athlete, his name cheered in stadiums. We lived our dreams, yet a part of us always remained in Willow Creek, under that old oak tree. And then, one day, years later, I found myself back in our little town, walking down familiar streets. I hadn't expected to see him, but there he was, standing under the same oak tree, waiting. "Hey, stranger," he said, his voice warm, familiar. I smiled, feeling the years melt away. "Hey." As we stood there, beneath the same sky that had once witnessed our first goodbyes, I knew one thing for certain: some love stories never truly end. They simply find their way back home.